Maybe this will teach you not to interfere with our family decisions, my daughter-in-law Rebecca said, before slamming the door in my face, leaving me shivering on the porch in my nightgown at 2 a.m. while snow fell around me. What she didn't know was that by 9 a.m. the next morning, she'd be frantically calling every bank in Minneapolis, desperately trying to understand why every credit card, debit card, and automatic payment tied to what she thought were family accounts had just been permanently frozen. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and financial justice, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when someone pushes the wrong 70-year-old woman too far, especially when that woman controls more money than they ever imagined. My name is Dorothy Mitchell. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 2 years ago when I made what I thought was a loving decision to help my struggling son and his growing family, a decision that would teach me the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being generous and being a fool. But to understand how I ended up locked outside my own son's house in a Minnesota snowstorm before becoming the most financially powerful person in my family's life, you need to know who I was before I let my maternal instincts cloud my business judgment. For 38 years, I was Dorothy Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Financial Services, one of the most successful independent wealth management firms in the upper Midwest. I didn't just manage money, I grew fortunes. My company specialized in investment strategies for high net worth individuals, and I had built a client base that included everyone from tech entrepreneurs to professional athletes to old money families who had trusted the Mitchell name for decades. I started with nothing but a finance degree from the University of Minnesota and a $10,000 inheritance from my grandmother when my husband Paul died in a car accident at age 35, leaving me with a 3-year-old son Michael and a determination to never be financially vulnerable again. My first client was myself. I took that $10,000 inheritance and built it into $50,000 through careful stock selections and bond investments within 18 months. Word spread through our church and neighborhood about the young widow who seemed to have a gift for making money grow, and people started asking for advice. What began as informal financial guidance for friends became a small consulting practice, which grew into a registered investment advisory firm, which eventually became Mitchell Financial Services, a company managing over $800 million in client assets by the time I was 60. But I didn't just manage other people's money. I practiced what I preached, building my own investment portfolio through decades of disciplined saving, smart stock picks, real estate investments, and compound growth that most people can only dream about. The first major investment that really changed my trajectory was a commercial real estate deal in downtown Minneapolis in 1987. I partnered with 2 other investors to purchase a struggling office building for $1.2 million. While my partners focused on immediate rental income, I saw the potential for the entire downtown area to revitalize over the next decade. I was right. By 1995, that building was worth $4.8 million. And my share of the profits funded my next 3 major investments. A portfolio of rental properties in upscale Minneapolis suburbs, a stake in a startup software company that would eventually be acquired by Microsoft, and most lucratively, early investments in medical device companies that would become leaders in the Minneapolis-St. Paul medical technology corridor. By my 50th birthday, I owned my investment firm outright, had a diversified portfolio worth $3.2 million, and was generating passive income that exceeded most people's salaries. But I didn't stop there. I continued to reinvest, diversify, and grow my wealth through careful analysis and strategic patience. The software company investment alone returned 4,800% when Microsoft acquired it in 2001. The medical device investments multiplied 20-fold as Minneapolis became a global hub for healthcare innovation. My real estate holdings appreciated consistently, and my bond portfolio provided steady income through every market cycle. By my 65th birthday, My personal net worth had reached $12 million. By my 70th birthday, it had grown to $18 million, not including my company's value or the various trusts and investment vehicles I had established over the years. I owned my Minneapolis penthouse outright, a $2.3 million property overlooking the Mississippi River with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound terrace that provided stunning views of the city skyline. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Carlisle Tower, with 3,200 square feet of elegant living space, 2 master suites, a gourmet kitchen with professional-grade appliances, and a wine cellar that housed my collection of vintage bottles from around the world. I also owned a lake house in Brainerd, Minnesota, a $1.8 million property on Gull Lake with 200 feet of private shoreline, a custom-built log home with 6 bedrooms, a guest cottage, and a boathouse with a vintage Chris Craft speedboat that I had restored myself during my early teen retirement years. My investment portfolio was diversified across multiple asset classes and geographic regions. Blue-chip dividend stocks that paid quarterly income, municipal bonds from stable municipalities that provided tax-free interest, commercial real estate partnerships in growing markets across the Midwest, international equity funds that provided exposure to emerging markets, and a commodities portfolio that included gold, silver, and agricultural futures that served as inflation hedges. Most importantly, I had built multiple streams of passive income that generated approximately $85,000 per month without me having to work. Dividends from my stock portfolio provided $28,000 monthly. Rental income from my real estate investments generated $31,000 monthly. Bond interest payments added another $15,000 monthly, and my share of profits from various business partnerships contributed an additional $11,000 monthly. This wasn't money I had to earn through active work. It was money that flowed into my accounts automatically, month after month, year after year, whether I was sleeping, traveling, or helping ungrateful family members who had no idea how wealthy their benefactor actually was. I had created what every financial advisor dreams of: true financial independence that could support any lifestyle I chose, fund any emergency that arose, and provide generational wealth for my family if I decided they deserved it. But perhaps the most important asset I had accumulated was knowledge. 38 years of managing investments had taught me how money really works, how wealthy families protect and grow their assets, and most crucially, how to structure financial arrangements to maintain control and protect against exploitation. Understood trusts, estate planning, tax optimization, and asset protection strategies that most people never learn. I knew how to create financial instruments that looked generous on the surface, but contained protections that would activate if recipients became ungrateful or abusive. What my son and daughter-in-law would eventually discover was that a woman who had built an $18 million fortune wasn't someone who could be easily manipulated or taken advantage of, especially when it came to money. I had dealt with every type of financial predator, family manipulator, and wealth-seeking opportunist during my decades in business. I knew the warning signs, I understood the tactics, and I had both the resources and the knowledge to protect myself when family members crossed the line from gratitude to exploitation. Michael had always been what educators politely call motivationally challenged. As a child, he was bright and charming, but struggled with any activity that required sustained effort or delayed gratification. He was the kid who would spend weeks planning elaborate projects but lose interest as soon as the work became difficult or tedious. In elementary school, he was constantly starting ambitious ventures: neighborhood newspapers that lasted one issue, lawn care services that ended when he realized grass grows back, elaborate garage sales that left our basement full of inventory he couldn't sell. I admired his creativity and entrepreneurial thinking, even when most of his ventures ended in chaos or boredom. In high school, this pattern intensified. He would become passionate about activities, photography, drama club, debate team, but would quit whenever the commitment level increased or when he wasn't immediately successful. His room was filled with expensive equipment and materials from abandoned hobbies. camera gear from his photography phase, musical instruments from his brief interest in band, art supplies from his month-long painting obsession. I funded these explorations because I believed that finding your passion requires experimentation, and because I wanted to give him opportunities I hadn't had growing up. I also funded them because I could easily afford to, and because seeing him excited about new possibilities brought me joy, even when those possibilities didn't last. When he did attend the University of Minnesota, it was primarily because I insisted, and because I was covering all expenses. He started as a business major, switched to communications, tried computer science, experimented with art history, and finally graduated after 6 years with a general studies degree that represented more persistence than passion. After graduation, he moved back home and spent 3 years figuring out his direction, while working a series of entry-level positions that he would abandon whenever the work became routine or demanding. Customer service representative at a telecommunications company, quit after 4 months because the customers were unreasonable and management didn't support creativity. Sales associate at an electronics store, quit after 6 months because retail doesn't allow for entrepreneurial growth. Administrative assistant at a law firm, quit after 3 months because legal work is too detail-oriented for creative personalities. Each job loss was explained by circumstances beyond his control or personality conflicts with supervisors who didn't appreciate his innovative thinking. I supported him through these transitions because I believed he was simply a late bloomer who needed time and encouragement to find his niche. Looking back, I realize I may have enabled his pattern of avoiding difficulty by providing a financial safety net that removed the natural consequences of his choices. When he quit jobs impulsively, he didn't face homelessness or hunger. He faced a comfortable bedroom in my penthouse and maternal encouragement to keep exploring until you find the right fit. When Michael met Rebecca at age 28, I was hopeful that marriage might provide the external motivation and structure he seemed to need. Rebecca was 25, had graduated from the University of Minnesota nursing program with honors, and had been working at Minneapolis General Hospital for 3 years. She seemed responsible, practical, and genuinely fond of Michael, despite his limited career prospects and inconsistent work history. Rebecca came from a middle-class family in Duluth. Her father was a high school principal, her mother was a part-time bookkeeper, and she had worked her way through nursing school with scholarships, student loans, and part-time jobs. She understood the value of hard work and financial responsibility in ways that Michael had never been forced to learn. During their engagement, Rebecca seemed to have a positive influence on Michael's decision-making and follow-through. She encouraged him to stick with his customer service job longer than usual. She helped him create budgets and financial goals. She suggested practical compromises when his entrepreneurial dreams exceeded his resources or capabilities. I was impressed by her influence and hopeful that marriage would provide the partnership Michael needed to develop more consistent work habits and realistic life planning. I was also grateful that someone other than me would be encouraging him toward responsibility and self-sufficiency. I paid for their wedding, a $35,000 celebration at the Guthrie Theater that Rebecca had dreamed of since childhood. The venue was elegant and sophisticated, with views of the Mississippi River in downtown Minneapolis. We had 150 guests, including my business associates, longtime family friends, and Rebecca's extended family from northern Minnesota. The reception featured a 7-course dinner prepared by the Guthrie's executive chef, open bar with premium liquors, live music from a jazz quartet, and floral arrangements that transformed the theater's event space into something worthy of a magazine spread. Rebecca's dress was a custom design from a local boutique that specialized in bridal couture, and Michael wore a tailored tuxedo that actually made him look like the successful businessman I hoped he would eventually become. I was happy to fund their dream wedding because I could easily afford it, because I wanted to welcome Rebecca into our family with generosity and celebration, and because I hoped this investment in their happiness would contribute to a successful marriage that would benefit both of them. When they started looking for their first house 6 months later, I provided the $40,000 down payment as a wedding gift. The house was a modest 4-bedroom colonial in Minnetonka, a suburb with excellent schools and a family-friendly community. The mortgage payments were manageable on their combined income, and the house provided space for the family they were planning to start. Rebecca was earning $65,000 annually as a hospital nurse, and Michael had finally found relatively stable employment as a property manager for a large apartment complex, earning $48,000 annually. Together, their $113,000 household income was sufficient to support their mortgage, living expenses, and modest lifestyle, especially with the boost my down payment gift had provided. For the first year of their marriage, this arrangement seemed to work well for everyone. Michael was more consistent about work when he had mortgage payments and household responsibilities. Rebecca managed their finances carefully and seemed to be building the stable family life she had always wanted. I enjoyed being a generous mother-in-law who could provide opportunities and security that enhanced their quality of life without creating dependency. I thought I was witnessing the successful maturation of my son and the beginning of a financially responsible family unit. What I was actually witnessing was the calm before a storm of escalating demands and expectations that would gradually transform my generous support into systematic exploitation. When Emma and Jacob were born 2 years after the wedding, I was in the delivery room and immediately opened college savings accounts for each child with initial deposits of $25,000. I had watched too many families struggle with college costs to let my grandchildren face those financial pressures, and I wanted to ensure their educational opportunities would be limited only by their abilities and interests, not by their parents' resources. The twins were beautiful, healthy babies who brought tremendous joy to our family. Emma was born first, 15 minutes ahead of Jacob, and from the beginning she was alert, curious, and seemed to study the world around her with intense focus. Jacob was more relaxed, content to sleep and eat and watch his surroundings with calm attention. As they grew into toddlers, their personalities became more distinct. Emma was adventurous and determined, the kind of child who would climb furniture, explore cabinets, and test every boundary with fearless persistence. Jacob was thoughtful and observant, preferring to watch Emma's experiments before deciding whether to try them himself. I loved being a grandmother and was actively involved in their daily care during their early years. I would babysit several evenings per week so Michael and Rebecca could have date nights or rest time. I attended every pediatric appointment, helped with feedings and diaper changes, and spent countless hours reading stories, playing games, and teaching them songs and nursery rhymes. When Rebecca decided to reduce her nursing schedule to part-time after the twins were born, I supported the decision both emotionally and financially. Having twins is exhausting under the best circumstances, and I understood her desire to focus on motherhood during those crucial early years. The reduction in Rebecca's income, from $65,000 annually to approximately $35,000 for part-time work, created some financial pressure on their household budget, but I was happy to help with extra expenses that arose from having 2 babies. Daycare costs, medical expenses not covered by insurance, additional clothing and equipment, and the general increase in household costs that comes with expanding from 2 people to 4. I contributed approximately $15,000 during the twins' first year to help cover these additional expenses, and I considered it money well spent to ensure that Emma and Jacob had everything they needed and that Rebecca could focus on motherhood without financial stress. During their toddler years, I continued to be actively involved and financially supportive. When they outgrew their cribs and needed toddler beds, I purchased beautiful matching bedroom sets that would grow with them through their elementary years. When they needed car seats, strollers, high chairs, and the endless array of equipment that toddlers require, I provided those items as gifts that gave me joy to give and that made their parents' lives easier. When Emma showed early interest in music, I bought a small piano and arranged for beginner lessons. When Jacob demonstrated mechanical aptitude with building blocks and simple machines, I provided increasingly sophisticated construction sets and educational toys that encouraged his engineering interests. I loved watching them discover their individual personalities and talents, and I was grateful to have the resources to support their development in ways that their parents might not have been able to afford independently. What I didn't recognize at the time was that my generous support was gradually training Michael and Rebecca to expect external funding for any expense that exceeded their basic budget. Instead of learning to prioritize, save, and make difficult choices about discretionary spending, they were learning that Dorothy will handle it was a viable financial strategy. By the time the twins turned 3, I was contributing approximately $25,000 annually to support various aspects of their family life. Not just emergency expenses or special occasions, but regular ongoing costs that had somehow become my responsibility, rather than expenses that Michael and Rebecca needed to plan and budget for themselves. But I was happy to provide this support because I loved my family, because I could easily afford these contributions, and because I believed I was investing in the twins' development and their parents' success. What I was actually doing was creating a dynamic where my financial support became an expectation rather than a gift, and where Michael and Rebecca began to make decisions based on what I could afford rather than what they could afford. The foundation was being laid for the exploitation and entitlement that would escalate dramatically over the following years. But at the time, it felt like I was simply being a loving grandmother and supportive mother who was blessed with the resources to make her family's life easier and more opportunities available. When the twins turned 5 and it was time to consider kindergarten options, the conversation about their education became the first major sign of the entitlement that would eventually characterize Michael and Rebecca's approach to my financial support. The neighborhood public school was perfectly adequate, well-funded, experienced teachers, solid academic programs, and diverse student body that would provide Emma and Jacob with exposure to children from various backgrounds and economic circumstances. The school was highly rated, had excellent facilities, and would provide a strong educational foundation at no cost to the family. But Rebecca had been researching private schools and had become convinced that Emma and Jacob needed a more enriched educational environment to reach their full potential. "Dorothy, I've been visiting schools, and I think the twins would really benefit from smaller class sizes and more individualized attention," Rebecca explained during one of our Sunday dinners. "The public school has 28 children per kindergarten class, but St. Catherine's Academy has only 15 children per class and 2 teachers in each room." St. Catherine's Academy was indeed an excellent school with a strong academic reputation, beautiful facilities, and programs that emphasized both academic achievement and character development. It was also expensive, $9,000 per year per child, which meant $18,000 annually in tuition costs that Michael and Rebecca couldn't afford on their current income. "And honestly," Michael added, "we want Emma and Jacob to have every advantage we can give them. Education is the foundation for everything else, and we don't want them to be limited by our financial situation." The conversation was carefully orchestrated to position private school as a necessity rather than a luxury, and to frame my funding of that choice as an investment in the twins' future, rather than as covering an expense their parents had chosen but couldn't afford. "We know it's a big expense," Rebecca continued, "but we thought maybe this could be an early Christmas and birthday gift for the twins. Instead of buying them toys they'll outgrow, we could invest in education that will benefit them for their entire lives." The request was presented as my idea rather than their demand, and as a substitution for other gifts rather than an additional expense. They had calculated exactly how to make the request seem reasonable while avoiding any acknowledgement that they were asking me to fund a $18,000 annual commitment that would continue for the next 13 years of the twins' education. I agreed to pay for private school because I believed in the value of excellent education, because I wanted Emma and Jacob to have opportunities that would maximize their potential, and because I could afford the expense without financial hardship. But, more importantly, I agreed because I trusted Michael and Rebecca's judgment about what was best for their children, and I wanted to support their parenting decisions rather than create conflict about educational choices. What I didn't realize was that this decision established a precedent that my financial support would be available for any expense that Michael and Rebecca deemed beneficial for their family, regardless of whether they could afford those expenses themselves or had explored less costly alternatives. The private school tuition became the first major recurring expense that I was expected to handle without ongoing discussion or annual reconsideration. It was simply understood that Dorothy would pay for St. Catherine's Academy, and that this expense would continue throughout the twins' educational careers without regard to changes in Michael and Rebecca's income or my willingness to continue funding their choices. 2 years after the twins started at St. Catherine's Academy, Michael decided that property management wasn't fulfilling his entrepreneurial potential, and that he needed to transition to a career that would allow for unlimited income growth and creative autonomy. His chosen path was real estate sales, which he was convinced would allow him to build a business rather than just work a job, and eventually achieve the financial success that had eluded him in previous employment. "Mom, I've been thinking about this for months," Michael explained during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Property management is steady, but it's never going to provide the kind of income that allows Rebecca to stay home with the kids full-time, or gives us the flexibility to really build wealth for our family's future." The decision to leave stable employment for commission-based real estate sales would have been risky under any circumstances, but it was particularly challenging given their financial obligations and Rebecca's part-time income status. "I know. There's some financial risk during the transition period," Michael continued, "but I've been talking to successful agents, and the income potential is really unlimited for someone willing to work hard and build relationships." What he didn't mention was that real estate sales requires substantial upfront investment in licensing, training, marketing materials, and living expenses during the initial period when new agents are building their client base and learning the business. New agents typically earn very little during their first year, and many fail to achieve sustainable income levels even after several years in the business. "We were hoping you might be able to help us through the transition period," Rebecca added, "just until Michael gets established and starts earning consistent commissions." The transition period they were requesting support for turned out to be 18 months and approximately $45,000 in total costs: real estate licensing courses and examination fees, professional wardrobe suitable for meeting with clients and attending business events, marketing materials including business cards, brochures, and advertising expenses, vehicle lease for a car that would make appropriate impression on potential clients, and most significantly, living expenses to replace Michael's property management salary during the months when his real estate income was minimal. "It's really an investment in our family's future earning potential," Michael explained when I questioned the scope of the financial support they were requesting. "Once I'm established, I'll be earning significantly more than I ever could in property management, and we'll be able to start paying you back and building real financial independence." The payback promise was vague and open-ended, with no specific timeline or amount discussed. The focus was entirely on the investment potential and the temporary nature of the support, rather than on concrete plans for repayment or realistic projections of Michael's likely earnings in real estate. Agreed to fund Michael's career transition because I believed in supporting family members who were trying to improve their financial situation, because I wanted him to find career satisfaction and success, and because I hoped that higher earnings would eventually reduce their dependence on my financial support. What actually happened was that Michael's real estate career generated minimal income while requiring ongoing expenses for continuing education, marketing, and business development. After 18 months, he was earning approximately $35,000 annually from real estate sales. less than his previous property management salary, and far less than the unlimited income potential he had projected. But instead of acknowledging that the career change had been financially unsuccessful, Michael and Rebecca reframed his modest earnings as building toward future success and continued to rely on my financial support to bridge the gap between their expenses and their actual income. The career change had actually increased their dependence on my funding rather than reducing it, but it had been presented and accepted as a temporary investment in their family's financial independence. As my financial contributions became more substantial and more regular, Michael and Rebecca's lifestyle began to inflate beyond what their actual income could support. This happened gradually and was always justified by the twins' needs, Michael's business requirements, or Rebecca's household management responsibilities. The twins' extracurricular activities multiplied and intensified far beyond what most families consider normal or necessary. Piano lessons for Emma became piano lessons, plus voice coaching, plus dance classes, plus art instruction. Jacob's interest in building things became robotics classes, plus computer programming camp, plus advanced mathematics, tutoring plus science competition teams. Each activity was presented as educational enrichment that would benefit the twins' development, but collectively they represented approximately $1,200 per month in fees, equipment, and transportation costs. We want Emma and Jacob to have the opportunity to discover their passions and develop their talents, Rebecca would explain. So many successful adults trace their achievements back to childhood activities that sparked their interests. Family vacations became annual expectations rather than special treats, and the destinations and expenses escalated each year. Disney World when the twins were 7, $8,000 for flights, hotel, park tickets, meals, and souvenirs. A Caribbean cruise when they were 8, $9,500 for the cruise, flights, shore excursions, and vacation wardrobe. A ski trip to Colorado when they were 9, $12,000 for travel, lodging, lift tickets, equipment rental, lessons, and meals. Each vacation was justified as family bonding time and creating memories that will last a lifetime, but they were also documented extensively on social media in ways that suggested Michael and Rebecca were living a lifestyle far beyond their actual means. Rebecca had started a family blog called The Mitchell Family Adventures that chronicled their vacations, activities, and daily life with carefully curated photographs and aspirational content. The blog generated no income but required ongoing investment in photography equipment, editing software, and promotional activities that were presented as building our family brand and documenting the twins' childhood. Most concerning was the way these lifestyle choices were presented to me as decisions that had already been made rather than options that were being considered. Vacation bookings, activity registrations, and equipment purchases would appear as accomplished facts requiring my immediate payment, rather than as proposals for my consideration and approval. Dorothy, I've registered Emma for the advanced dance intensive this summer, Rebecca would announce. The program fee is $2,800, and she'll need new performance outfits and shoes. The dance director says she has real potential, and this program could open doors for her. Mom, I've put a deposit down on the Colorado ski condo for next winter, Michael would inform me. The rates go up after March, so I wanted to secure our dates early. The total cost will be about $11,000, but it's going to be such an amazing experience for the kids. These announcements were structured to make refusal seem cruel or unreasonable. How could I deny Emma her dance potential? How could I disappoint the twins by canceling their ski vacation? How could I prioritize money over family experiences and children's opportunities? But cumulatively, these decisions represented a lifestyle that required approximately $85,000 annually in expenses beyond what Michael and Rebecca could afford on their actual income. Private school tuition, mortgage assistance, utility payments, insurance premiums, vehicle expenses, extracurricular activities, vacations, clothing, and household expenses that they couldn't support independently. By the time the twins turned 10, I was essentially funding an upper-middle-class lifestyle for a family whose actual income was firmly middle class. They were living in a beautiful home, taking expensive vacations, providing their children with premium educational and recreational opportunities, and maintaining the appearance of financial success while being completely dependent on my contributions to sustain their chosen standard of living. The most troubling aspect wasn't the amount of money I was contributing. I could easily afford these expenses. The troubling aspect was the complete transformation in how these contributions were requested, received, and acknowledged. What had begun as grateful requests for assistance had evolved into matter-of-fact announcements about expenses that I was expected to handle without question or complaint. Michael and Rebecca had stopped asking for help and started informing me about costs that required my attention. They had stopped expressing gratitude and started expressing expectations. They had stopped treating my contributions as generous gifts and started treating them as natural family resources that I was obligated to provide. Most significantly, they had stopped making any effort to live within their means or to develop financial independence. Instead of viewing my support as temporary assistance that would help them build toward self-sufficiency, they had restructured their entire lifestyle around the assumption that Dorothy's funding would be available indefinitely for any expense they deemed worthwhile. The stage was set for the escalation that would eventually push my tolerance beyond its breaking point. They had established a pattern of escalating demands, diminishing gratitude, and increasing entitlement that would eventually lead them to cross boundaries I didn't even know I had. But first, they would need to test exactly how far their advantage extended and how much control they had gained over my resources, my decisions, and my life. That test was coming sooner than any of us realized, and the results would surprise everyone involved, especially Michael and Rebecca, who had seriously miscalculated the extent of their power and the limits of my patience. The second year of what I now recognize as systematic financial exploitation began with what Rebecca called a family financial optimization meeting. She had prepared spreadsheets, printed articles about multi-generational wealth management, and arranged the dining room table like a corporate boardroom to discuss our family's financial future. "Dorothy, we've been thinking about how we can be more strategic about our financial planning," Rebecca began, her laptop open to a PowerPoint presentation she had clearly spent considerable time preparing. "Right now, we're handling expenses in a somewhat random way, and we think there might be more efficient approaches that benefit everyone." The presentation was impressive in its thoroughness and manipulative in its implications. Rebecca had calculated my annual contributions to their family, $85,000 in direct support, plus various gifts, emergency assistance, and special expenses, and had created projections showing how that money could be optimized through different financial structures and tax strategies. "For instance," she continued, clicking through slides that looked professionally designed, "instead of you paying the twins' tuition directly, we could set up educational trusts that provide tax advantages and create more formal structures for their college planning." Michael jumped in with enthusiasm that seemed genuine but felt rehearsed. "Mom, what Rebecca has discovered is that we've been thinking too small about family financial planning. Instead of handling expenses year by year, we should be thinking about long-term wealth management strategies that protect everyone's interests." The optimization they were proposing involved consolidating many of my financial contributions into regular monthly transfers that would give them more predictable access to funding while creating tax advantages that would primarily benefit their household rather than mine. "We're not asking for more money," Rebecca was careful to emphasize. "We're asking for smarter money management that makes the same contributions work more effectively for everyone." But buried in the details of their proposal were several concerning elements that would have transferred significant control over my financial decisions to their preferences and priorities. Joint accounts for family expenses that would give them direct access to funds without requiring my approval for each expenditure. Automatic transfers that would make their monthly budget independent of my ongoing willingness to provide support. And most troubling, financial arrangements that would make it difficult for me to reduce or eliminate my contributions without causing immediate hardship for their household. This is really about creating financial security for the twins, Michael explained. Right now, if something happened to you, or if your financial situation changed, Emma and Jacob's education and opportunities would be at risk. This structure would protect their stability regardless of future circumstances. They were presenting their proposal as protecting the twins from potential changes in my financial situation, but what they were actually requesting was protection from potential changes in my willingness to continue subsidizing their lifestyle indefinitely. I agreed to consider their proposals because they seemed thoughtful and well-researched, and because I wanted to be open to suggestions that might benefit everyone involved. But I also insisted on reviewing any proposed changes with my own financial advisor before implementing them. What I discovered during that review was that every optimization Rebecca had suggested would have reduced my control over my own money while increasing their access to it. The tax advantages were minimal for someone in my financial situation, but the convenience advantages for Michael and Rebecca were substantial. My financial advisor, James Chen, was diplomatically direct in his assessment. Dorothy, these arrangements would essentially convert your voluntary financial support into mandatory financial obligations. Once these structures are in place, withdrawing your support would be legally and practically complicated and would likely create significant hardship for your family. And what about the tax advantages they've calculated? The tax benefits are real but modest for someone with your income level and asset base. The primary beneficiaries of these arrangements would be Michael and Rebecca, who would gain access to predictable monthly income without the uncertainty of requesting your approval for each expense. I declined to implement their financial optimization plan, explaining that I preferred to maintain flexibility in my financial arrangements and that I wasn't comfortable with the level of ongoing obligation their proposals would have created. Michael and Rebecca accepted my decision with what seemed like understanding, but I later realized that my refusal to formalize their access to my money prompted them to pursue alternative strategies for securing their financial dependence on me. When direct financial negotiation didn't achieve the level of access and control they wanted, Michael and Rebecca shifted to emotional manipulation tactics designed to make me feel guilty for not providing more support and anxious about potentially losing access to my grandchildren. The campaign began with subtle expressions of financial stress that were designed to make me worry about their well-being without explicitly asking for additional help. Dorothy, I'm sure you've noticed that we've been eating at home more often lately, Rebecca mentioned during one of our Sunday dinners. We're trying to be more careful about our budget now that the twins are getting older and their activities are becoming more expensive. And we've been looking at smaller vacation options for this summer, Michael added. The kids have been asking about going back to Disney World, but we want to be responsible about our spending. These comments were carefully crafted to suggest financial hardship without actually complaining or requesting assistance. They wanted me to volunteer additional support rather than having to ask for it directly, which would have allowed them to maintain the appearance of financial independence while securing increased funding. When I didn't immediately offer to cover their unstated financial needs, the emotional pressure escalated to more direct manipulation tactics. "Mom, I'm worried about Emma and Jacob," Michael said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "They've been asking questions about why some of their friends get to do activities that we can't afford, and it's hard to explain financial limitations to kids their age. And honestly," Rebecca added, "we don't want them to feel like they're missing out on opportunities because of our financial situation. Children shouldn't have to pay the price for their parents' limitations." The implication was that I had the power to prevent my grandchildren from feeling deprived, and that my failure to provide additional support was directly causing them emotional harm. They were positioning me as the person responsible for the twins' happiness and opportunities, rather than taking responsibility for living within their own means. When gentle guilt didn't achieve the desired results, they escalated to more direct, emotional coercion involving the twins themselves. "Grandma Dorothy, why can't we go to Disney World this summer?" Emma asked during one of our visits, clearly prompted by previous conversations with her parents. "Madison's family is going, and so is Jacob's friend Alex. Are we too poor to go on vacation?" "Grandma, everyone in my robotics class has the advanced AR programming kit except me," Jacob mentioned casually. "Mom says it's too expensive, but it's only $300. Don't you have $300? These conversations were heartbreaking because the twins genuinely didn't understand the financial dynamics involved, but they were clearly being used as emotional leverage to pressure me into providing funding that their parents wanted but couldn't directly request. The most manipulative aspect of this campaign was the way Michael and Rebecca would follow up on these interactions to reinforce the emotional pressure. "Dorothy, I hope you weren't upset by Emma's questions about Disney World," Rebecca would say. "We try not to discuss financial limitations in front of the children, but sometimes they notice when their friends have opportunities that we can't provide." "Mom, it breaks my heart when Jacob compares our situation to his classmates' families," Michael would add. "I know he doesn't understand why we can't afford things that seem normal to other kids in his social group." They were creating a narrative where my financial support was not generous assistance, but necessary intervention to prevent my grandchildren from experiencing economic disadvantage and social exclusion. This emotional manipulation was particularly effective because it combined my love for Emma and Jacob with my desire to see them have opportunities and experiences that would enrich their lives. I didn't want them to feel different from their peers or limited by their parents' financial situation. But it was also manipulative because it ignored the fact that Michael and Rebecca had created their financial limitations through lifestyle choices that exceeded their income. They were living beyond their means and then using their children's resulting disappointment as emotional leverage to secure additional funding from me. As Michael and Rebecca became more sophisticated in their financial dependence on me, they also became more systematic about limiting my connections to outside perspectives that might help me recognize the manipulative dynamics they were creating. This isolation campaign was subtle and was always presented as concern for my well-being, rather than control over my activities and relationships. My weekly bridge games with longtime friends became stressful and too demanding for someone my age. "Dorothy, we've noticed you seem tired after your bridge nights," Rebecca would observe. "Maybe it would be better to reduce those commitments and focus on activities that are more relaxing. My involvement in charitable board meetings was too much responsibility and potentially overwhelming given my age and the complexity of modern nonprofit management." "Mom, you've done so much for these organizations over the years," Michael would say. "Maybe it's time to step back and let younger people handle the administrative burdens." My consulting work with former clients who still sought my financial advice was unnecessary stress that I should eliminate to enjoy retirement properly. "Dorothy, you've already achieved everything you need to achieve professionally," Rebecca would explain. "Why continue working when you could be spending time with family?" Each of these suggestions seemed reasonable individually and was presented as caring advice rather than controlling behavior. But collectively, they were systematically reducing my contact with people who knew me well, respected my expertise, and might have provided outside perspectives on the family dynamics that were developing. My longtime friend Margaret Anderson, who had been my bridge partner for 15 years, called one evening to express concern about my reduced social activity. "Dorothy, I haven't seen you at bridge in 6 weeks, and you've missed the last 2 charity luncheons," she said. "Is everything all right? You seem to have disappeared from all our usual activities." When I explained that I was spending more time with family and that Michael and Rebecca were concerned about me overcommitting to social obligations, Margaret's response was immediate and direct. "Dorothy, that doesn't sound like you at all. You've always been one of the most socially active and engaged people I know. Are you sure your family's concerns are about your well-being, or are they about controlling your time and attention?" Her question planted a seed of awareness that would grow over the following months, but at the time I dismissed her concern as misunderstanding the natural evolution of family relationships and generational priorities. What I didn't recognize was that Michael and Rebecca were deliberately isolating me from people who might question their increasing control over my life and resources. They were creating an environment where their opinions and preferences were the primary influences on my decisions, and where outside perspectives were filtered through their assessment of what was appropriate for someone my age. The isolation campaign also included subtle discouragement of activities that brought me personal satisfaction but didn't directly benefit their family's needs or interests. My art collection, which I had been building for 20 years and which had become quite valuable, was too much to manage and a security risk in my penthouse. "Dorothy, these pieces are worth so much money, and having them in a residential setting makes you a target for theft," Rebecca would say. "Maybe you should consider donating them to museums where they'd be properly secured and appreciated." My wine collection, which included vintage bottles that had appreciated significantly in value, was dangerous for someone my age to maintain. "Mom, climbing around in that wine cellar isn't safe," Michael would worry. "What if you fell and got hurt? Maybe it's time to sell the collection and eliminate that risk." My travel plans, which had always included international trips to visit art museums and explore different cultures, were too strenuous and risky for someone my age. "Dorothy, international travel is so complicated now, and what if you had a medical emergency in a foreign country?" Rebecca would fret. "Maybe it's safer to focus on domestic destinations that are closer to family." Each suggestion was framed as concern for my safety and well-being, but the cumulative effect was to discourage activities that gave me personal fulfillment, and to redirect my time, energy, and resources toward family-centered activities that served their interests rather than mine. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of Michael and Rebecca's systematic takeover was the gradual erosion of my authority in financial decisions that involved my own money. This process began with requests for my input on family financial decisions, evolved into expectations that I would participate in their financial planning, and eventually became assumptions that their financial needs took priority over my personal preferences and goals. The twins' education provided the perfect vehicle for this authority transfer. When Emma and Jacob were in 4th grade, Rebecca decided that they needed additional academic support to maintain their competitive position at St. Catherine's Academy. "Dorothy, we've been meeting with the twins' teachers, and they've recommended supplemental tutoring in mathematics and advanced reading comprehension," Rebecca announced during one of our family dinners. "The school has identified both children as gifted learners who would benefit from individualized instruction beyond what classroom teaching can provide." The tutoring program Rebecca had selected cost $400 per week per child, $800 weekly, or approximately $3,200 monthly during the school year. Over a full academic year, the cost would exceed $25,000, which was beyond what Michael and Rebecca could afford, but which they expected me to fund as an educational investment. "We've already spoken with the tutoring center and scheduled assessments for both children," Michael added. "They have an opening in their advanced program starting next week, but we need to confirm enrollment by Wednesday." The timing pressure was artificial. There was no legitimate reason why tutoring decisions needed to be made within days, but it was designed to prevent me from thoroughly researching the program, considering alternatives, or negotiating the scope and cost of the services. More importantly, Michael and Rebecca had already made commitments and created expectations with the children without consulting me about funding, then presented those commitments as established facts that required my immediate financial support. "Emma and Jacob are so excited about the program," Rebecca continued. "Emma especially is looking forward to advanced mathematics, and Jacob is thrilled about the creative writing component. We told them they'd be starting next week." By involving the twins in their planning and creating excitement about the program before securing funding, they had made it emotionally difficult for me to decline or delay the expense. Saying no would mean disappointing my grandchildren and, disrupting plans that had already been presented to them as confirmed. This pattern repeated across multiple decision areas. Family vacation plans would be researched, destinations selected, and reservations made before I was informed about the costs and asked to provide funding. Extracurricular activities would be chosen, schedules arranged, and equipment purchased before I was consulted about the expenses involved. We wanted to handle all the logistics so you wouldn't have to worry about the details, Michael would explain when I questioned this approach. We know how busy you are, and we thought you'd prefer to just approve the overall plan rather than getting involved in all the coordination. But what was actually happening was that I was being excluded from decision-making processes while being expected to fund the results of those decisions. My role was being reduced to that of an ATM that provided money for choices made by other people, rather than a family member whose preferences and opinions were considered before financial commitments were made. The most concerning example occurred when Rebecca decided that their house needed significant renovations to better accommodate our growing family's needs. "Dorothy, we've been living in this house for 8 years, and it's starting to feel cramped with the twins getting older and needing more space," Rebecca explained during a carefully orchestrated conversation that occurred while we were touring their home and observing various problems that needed to be addressed. "The kitchen is too small for family gatherings," she pointed out. "The twins are sharing a bathroom that's inadequate for teenagers. The basement is unfinished, so there's no dedicated space for their activities and homework." The renovation plan Rebecca had developed would cost approximately $120,000 and would transform their modest colonial into a much more luxurious family home. Kitchen expansion with premium appliances and custom cabinetry, additional bathroom construction, basement finishing with dedicated study areas and entertainment space, master bedroom suite expansion with walk-in closets and spa-style bathroom. We've gotten quotes from 3 contractors, and we think this investment will significantly improve our family's quality of life while adding substantial value to the property, Michael added, showing me detailed plans and cost estimates that he had clearly been working on for months. "And honestly," Rebecca continued, "with the twins approaching teenage years, we really need more space and better facilities to maintain the kind of home environment that supports their academic and social development." The renovation was presented as a family necessity rather than a lifestyle upgrade, and as an investment that would benefit everyone rather than an expense that would primarily serve Michael and Rebecca's preferences for more luxurious living space. But most significantly, they had already selected contractors, finalized plans, and scheduled construction to begin within 6 weeks, all without consulting me about funding or involving me in decision-making about how my money would be used. "We wanted to handle all the planning and coordination so you wouldn't have to be involved in the stressful aspects of renovation management," Michael explained. "We just need your approval for the funding, and we'll take care of everything else." Was being asked to write a $120,000 check for a project I had no input in designing, no control over implementing, and no authority to modify or cancel. My role was purely financial: provide the money and trust their judgment about how it should be spent. One of the most manipulative tactics that emerged during this period was Michael and Rebecca's use of manufactured health concerns to justify increased control over my activities and decisions. Despite being in excellent health for a 70-year-old, I had no chronic conditions, took no regular medications, maintained an active lifestyle, and received glowing reports from my annual physical examinations. They began to express worries about my well-being that were used to limit my independence and increase their oversight of my life. The campaign began with observations about normal age-related changes that they reframed as concerning symptoms requiring family intervention. "Dorothy, we noticed you seemed a little tired after your doctor appointment yesterday," Rebecca would mention. "Maybe those medical visits are more stressful than you realize, and you should consider having someone accompany you to provide support." "Mom, you seem to have trouble finding your car keys this morning," Michael would observe. "That kind of memory issue can be an early warning sign that we should take seriously. Any sign of normal fatigue, temporary forgetfulness, or minor physical discomfort was seized upon as evidence that I needed more supervision and assistance. When I mentioned having a headache, it became proof that I was under too much stress. When I forgot where I put my reading glasses, it was a sign of concerning cognitive changes. When I felt tired after a long day, it demonstrated that I was overexerting myself. These expressions of concern were always accompanied by offers to help by taking over responsibilities that I was perfectly capable of handling myself. Dorothy, managing all those investment accounts must be exhausting, Rebecca would say with apparent sympathy. Maybe it would be less stressful to consolidate some of those responsibilities with a family member who could handle the day-to-day monitoring. Mom, driving in Minneapolis traffic is getting more dangerous every year, Michael would worry. Maybe we should arrange transportation services for you. Or better yet, we could handle your errands and appointments so you don't have to deal with the stress of city driving. The underlying message was that I was becoming frail and dependent, even though I was actually healthier and more active than many people my age. This narrative was being used to justify increased control over my life and decreased respect for my autonomy and decision-making capabilities. The health concern manipulation escalated dramatically when I mentioned experiencing some back pain after spending a day working in my garden at the lake house. Dorothy, back pain can be very serious at your age, Rebecca said with alarm that seemed disproportionate to the minor discomfort I had described. You could have herniated a disc or developed compression fractures. We should schedule an immediate appointment with an orthopedic specialist. And honestly, Mom, Michael added, maybe it's time to consider whether maintaining the lake house is too much physical work for you. All that gardening and property maintenance, what if you seriously injured yourself when no one was around? To help? Within 24 hours, they had scheduled medical appointments, researched orthopedic specialists, and begun discussing practical solutions for reducing my physical responsibilities that would coincidentally increase their control over my property and activities. We've been thinking that maybe we should arrange for professional landscaping services at the lake house, Rebecca suggested, and possibly general property management to handle maintenance issues so you don't have to deal with those physical demands. Or, Michael added thoughtfully, we could spend more time at the lake house ourselves to help with upkeep and make sure you're not managing everything alone. The back pain crisis became a vehicle for inserting themselves into my property, management decisions, and potentially gaining increased access to my lake house for their own recreational use. When my back pain resolved within a few days with rest and over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medication, exactly as my doctor predicted, Michael and Rebecca didn't acknowledge that their concerns had been overblown. Instead, they credited their intervention and continued management with my recovery. See how much better you feel when you're not trying to handle everything yourself? Rebecca would say. This just proves that accepting help and support is better for your health than trying to maintain complete independence. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the evolving family dynamics was watching Emma and Jacob learn to view me as a convenient source of funding rather than a grandmother deserving respect and consideration. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but was the natural result of their parents modeling entitled behavior and teaching them that my financial support was a family resource rather than generous gifts that should be appreciated. By age 12, both twins had absorbed their parents' attitudes about my role as family financier and had begun making requests, or rather announcements of need, without any sense that they were asking for significant favors. Grandma Dorothy, I need new dance shoes for my recital, Emma would announce, not as a request but as a statement of fact that implied immediate action was required. The ones I have don't match my costume, and everyone else in my class has the professional-grade shoes that cost $200. Grandma, my laptop is too slow for the video editing software we're using in media class, Jacob would inform me with the confident expectation that this problem would be immediately solved. I need one of the new MacBook Pros that has the advanced graphics processing. They're about $2,500, but it's really for educational purposes. The twins had learned to justify their requests by referencing educational benefits, peer comparisons, or competitive advantages that made their demands seem reasonable and necessary rather than expressions of luxury preferences. They had also learned to bypass their parents' authority by bringing requests directly to me, understanding that I was less likely to say no to them than their parents were, and that their parents were unlikely to contradict decisions I made about spending my own money. "Mom and Dad said I should ask you about summer camp," Emma would say, presenting parental authorization for requests that her parents had actually encouraged her to make. "There's a performing arts intensive in Colorado that costs $4,500, but it's only for students who show exceptional promise, and my dance teacher says I should definitely apply. My robotics coach thinks I should attend the national competition in California," Jacob would explain, presenting adult endorsement for expensive travel that would cost several $1,000s. "Dad says the experience would be really valuable for my college applications, and you're always saying education is important." Most concerning was the casual disrespect they had begun to show toward me when I occasionally questioned their requests or suggested they should contribute to costs through chores or part-time work. "Grandma, I don't have time for a job," Emma would respond with genuine puzzlement when I suggested she could earn money for dance expenses. "I have school, dance classes, voice lessons, and piano practice every day. Mom says my job is to focus on developing my talents." "But Grandma, you have so much money," Jacob would point out when I mentioned that his technology requests were expensive. "Mom showed me the investment reports, and your accounts earn more in a month than most people make in a year. Why would you want me to work for money when you already have more than you can spend?" The twins had been taught that my wealth was essentially unlimited and that my reluctance to fund their preferences was arbitrary rather than reasonable boundary setting. They had no understanding of the value of money, the importance of earning what you receive, or the difference between needs and wants. More troubling, they had begun to treat me with the casual dismissiveness that teenagers often show toward adults they consider powerless or irrelevant. They would interrupt my conversations, ignore my suggestions about household behavior, and dismiss my opinions about everything from academic choices to social activities. When I tried to discuss this disrespectful behavior with Michael and Rebecca, they assured me that this was normal teenage development and that I shouldn't take it personally. "Dorothy, all kids go through phases where they test boundaries with adults," Rebecca would explain. "Emma and Jacob love you deeply, but they're also developing their independence and learning to express their own opinions. And honestly, Mom," Michael would add, "sometimes your expectations are a little old-fashioned. Kids today are more direct and assertive than our generation was, and that's not necessarily a bad thing." The message was clear. Any attempt to demand respect or set boundaries with the twins would be seen as inappropriate interference in their parenting decisions and evidence that I didn't understand modern family dynamics. Was expected to provide unlimited financial support while accepting whatever level of respect and consideration the twins chose to show me, without any ability to influence their behavior or attitude toward me. As Michael and Rebecca became more comfortable with their dependence on my financial support, their expectations expanded beyond covering expenses to include active management of my investment decisions and estate planning. This expansion began with suggestions about optimizing my financial arrangements to better serve family needs, and evolved into assumptions that major financial decisions should be made collaboratively rather than independently. "Dorothy, we've been reviewing your investment portfolio, and we think there might be some opportunities for better diversification," Rebecca announced during one of our family dinners, referring to financial information that I had never shared with them, but which they had apparently accessed through means I didn't fully understand. "How did you review my investment portfolio?" I asked, confused about how they would have obtained that information. "Well, we're listed as emergency contacts on several of your accounts," Michael explained. "And when we were helping you organize your financial documents last month, we noticed some patterns that might benefit from professional review. I didn't remember asking them to help organize my financial documents or authorizing them to access my account information. but they proceeded as if this access was natural and appropriate given our family relationship. The point is, Rebecca continued, we think you might be taking on more investment risk than necessary for someone your age, and there might be strategies that provide better security while also creating more favorable tax treatment for family wealth transfer. The conversation revealed that they had been studying my financial situation in detail and developing opinions about how my money should be managed, invested, and ultimately distributed. They were positioning themselves as partners in my financial decision-making rather than beneficiaries of my generosity. We've made an appointment with an estate planning attorney who specializes in multi-generational wealth management, Michael informed me. We thought it would be valuable to get professional advice about structuring things in ways that benefit everyone. When did you make this appointment? Next Tuesday at 2 p.m. We'll pick you up and drive you there so you don't have to worry about downtown parking. They had made appointments with my financial advisors without consulting me, then presented those appointments as services they were providing for my convenience, rather than as presumptuous interference in my personal business affairs. The estate planning consultation was particularly revealing about their assumptions and expectations regarding my wealth. Mrs. Mitchell, the attorney began, your son and daughter-in-law have explained that you're interested in creating more efficient structures for transferring wealth to the next generation while maintaining income and control during your lifetime. Actually, I corrected, I haven't expressed interest in any wealth transfer strategies. I'm perfectly comfortable with my current financial arrangements. Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances before Michael spoke up. Mom, we thought you'd want to minimize estate taxes and create more certainty for Emma and Jacob's financial security. And honestly, Rebecca added, given how much you're already contributing to our family's expenses, it makes sense to structure those contributions in ways that provide tax advantages and create legal protections for everyone involved. They were reframing my voluntary financial support as the beginning of an estate transfer process that should be formalized and expanded, rather than as gifts that I could discontinue at any time based on my preferences and their behavior. The attorney's recommendations were sophisticated and would have provided significant tax advantages, but they would also have transferred substantial control over my assets to family members and created legal obligations that would have been difficult to modify if family relationships changed. These structures would ensure that your family's financial security isn't dependent on your ongoing decision-making, the attorney explained, and would provide protections that would benefit everyone if your capacity to manage financial affairs became compromised. The underlying assumption was that my independent financial management was temporary, and that responsible planning required transferring control to younger family members who would eventually inherit and manage my wealth anyway. I declined to implement the estate planning strategies Michael and Rebecca had recommended, explaining that I preferred to maintain full control over my assets and that I wasn't ready to begin formal wealth transfer processes. Their reaction to my decision was more intense than I expected and provided clear insight into their assumptions about their relationship to my money. Mom, you're being short-sighted about this, Michael said with frustration that seemed disproportionate to the situation. These strategies would benefit everyone, including you, and delaying implementation just costs money and unnecessary taxes. Dorothy, I understand that change can be scary, Rebecca added with condescending sympathy. But sometimes we have to make decisions based on practical considerations rather than emotional comfort. They were treating my refusal to transfer control of my assets as irrational stubbornness, rather than reasonable boundary setting, and their disappointment revealed how much they had been counting on gaining formal access to my wealth. As my resistance to their financial control strategies became apparent, Michael and Rebecca intensified their efforts to isolate me from outside influences and professional advisors who might support my independence. Dorothy, we're concerned about some of the financial advice you've been getting, Rebecca said after I declined to implement their estate planning recommendations. Some of these older advisors don't understand modern wealth management strategies and might not be giving you the best guidance for your situation. Maybe it's time to consider updating your professional team, Michael suggested. Someone who understands family financial planning and can provide advice that benefits everyone involved. They were attempting to replace my longtime financial advisors with professionals they had selected and who would presumably be more supportive of their wealth transfer preferences. When I refused to change advisors, they began scheduling their own consultations with financial professionals and presenting the results as research that I should consider for my own planning. We met with a wonderful estate planning attorney who specializes in high net worth family planning, Rebecca would report. She had some fascinating insights about strategies that could really benefit our family situation. And we've been talking to an investment advisor who has some innovative approaches to multi-generational wealth management, Michael would add. He thinks there are significant opportunities we're missing with our current approach. These consultations were always presented as information gathering rather than planning for my financial affairs, but they were clearly intended to identify professionals who would support their preferences and potentially pressure me to adopt strategies that would increase their control over my money. The most troubling aspect of their isolation campaign was the way they began to monitor and control my communications with existing advisors and friends. Phone calls from my financial advisor would be answered by Rebecca, who would explain that I was resting or busy with family activities, and offer to take messages that were never reliably delivered to me. Invitations to social events and professional gatherings would be filtered through Michael and Rebecca, who would help me manage my calendar by declining commitments that they deemed too stressful or inappropriate for someone my age. Mail from financial institutions and investment companies would be collected by Rebecca, who offered to help organize important documents, but who was actually controlling my access to information about my own accounts and assets. We just want to protect you from unnecessary stress and make sure you're not being pressured by people who don't understand your family situation, Rebecca would explain when I questioned these interventions. But what was actually happening was that I was being systematically cut off from professional advisors, longtime friends, and information sources that might have helped me recognize the manipulation and exploitation that was escalating around me. By the winter of 2024, I was living in a bubble of family-controlled information and social contact that made it difficult to maintain perspective on the financial and emotional dynamics that had taken over my life. Michael and Rebecca had successfully positioned themselves as the primary influences on my decisions, the filters for my social and professional interactions, and the managers of my daily activities and priorities. The stage was set for the final confrontation that would test exactly how far their control extended and how much of my autonomy and dignity I was willing to sacrifice to maintain family relationships. What they didn't realize was that while they had been systematically manipulating and isolating me, they had also been providing me with a clear education in their true priorities and character. I was learning exactly how far they were willing to push their advantage, and exactly how little respect they had for me as an individual rather than as a source of funding. They were about to discover that the 70-year-old woman they had been treating as a manageable resource was still the same person who had built an $18 million fortune through strategic thinking, careful planning, and an absolute refusal to let anyone take advantage of her without consequences. The winter night that would change everything was just 6 weeks away, and the foundation for that dramatic confrontation had been carefully laid. Through months of escalating manipulation, control, and exploitation, they thought they had successfully established dominance over my life and resources. They were about to learn exactly how much power I still retained, and exactly how dangerous it could be to underestimate someone whose generosity they had mistaken for weakness. The conversation that would shatter my tolerance forever happened. On a frigid February evening, when Minneapolis was experiencing one of the worst blizzards in decades, the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees Celsius, with wind chills reaching 35 degrees Celsius, and the city had issued warnings for residents to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. I had been staying at Michael and Rebecca's house for 3 days because my penthouse building was experiencing heating system repairs, and they had insisted it would be safer and more comfortable for me to stay with them until the repairs were completed. What I didn't realize was that this temporary arrangement was actually a test to see how much control they could exert over my life and decisions when I was living under their roof and dependent on their hospitality. The evening started normally enough. We had finished dinner, the twins were doing homework in their rooms, and I was reading in the living room while Michael and Rebecca cleaned up in the kitchen. I could hear them talking quietly, but I wasn't paying attention to their conversation until their voices became more animated. "She's being completely unreasonable about the estate planning," Rebecca was saying, clearly frustrated. "We've given her multiple opportunities to do the right thing for the family, and she keeps refusing to consider what's best for everyone." "I know," Michael replied, his voice carrying a tone of exasperation I had never heard him use when discussing me. "Sometimes I think she's becoming selfish in her old age. She has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes, but she acts like helping her own family is some kind of burden." I felt my stomach clench as I realized they were discussing me as if I were a problematic obligation rather than the person who had been funding their lifestyle for the past 2 years. "And the way she questions every expense," Rebecca continued, "like we're trying to take advantage of her instead of just providing normal opportunities for our children. Emma and Jacob deserve the same advantages as their classmates, and Dorothy acts like we're being greedy for wanting the best for our kids. Maybe we need to be more direct about our expectations," Michael suggested. "She's going to leave us everything eventually anyway, so why is she making it so difficult to access resources that will ultimately benefit the family?" The casual assumption that they would inherit my wealth, combined with their resentment of my reluctance to give them more control over my money, revealed attitudes and expectations that shocked me to my core. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Maybe it's time to have a serious conversation about Dorothy's living situation. This house is getting crowded with all of us here, and honestly, she's becoming more demanding and difficult to manage." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time for her to consider assisted living or some kind of senior community where she'd have professional care, and we wouldn't have to worry about managing her needs, on top of everything else we're dealing with." My blood turned to ice as I realized they were discussing moving me into institutional care, not because I needed it, but because my presence in their lives had become inconvenient. "She's still pretty independent," Michael said doubtfully. "For now," Rebecca replied ominously. "But she's showing signs of cognitive decline, and her expectations about family financial support are becoming unrealistic. Maybe professional care would help her develop more appropriate perspectives about money, management, and family relationships. They were planning to use fabricated health concerns to justify moving me into assisted living, where I would presumably be easier to control and where they could gain power of attorney over my financial affairs." I sat in the living room, frozen with shock and betrayal, as I listened to my son and daughter-in-law discuss strategies for institutionalizing me so they could gain better access to my money. I confronted them immediately, walking into the kitchen with the calm determination that had served me well during 40 years of business negotiations. "I heard your conversation," I said quietly, watching their faces turn white with panic. "I heard you discussing assisted living facilities and my cognitive decline and your frustrations with my financial boundaries." Michael and Rebecca stood frozen, clearly scrambling to figure out how to respond to being caught planning my institutionalization. "Dorothy, you misunderstood," Rebecca began, her voice high with artificial sweetness. "We were just discussing contingency planning in case your health needs change in the future." "No," I replied firmly. "You were discussing how to get rid of me because my presence in your lives has become inconvenient and because I'm not giving you the level of financial control you want." "Mom, that's not—" Michael started. "Stop," I interrupted. "I heard exactly what you said. You think I'm selfish for not giving you unlimited access to my money. You think I'm becoming difficult to manage. You think I should be in professional care so you don't have to deal with my expectations and boundaries." The silence in the kitchen was profound as they realized their true attitudes had been exposed. "And you," I continued, looking directly at Rebecca, "you think I'm showing signs of cognitive decline because I won't agree to your estate planning schemes. You think professional care would help me develop more appropriate perspectives about family financial support." Rebecca's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Dorothy, we're trying to think about what's best for everyone involved. Sometimes that requires difficult conversations about realistic planning." "Realistic planning," I repeated. "Is that what you call scheming to institutionalize me so you can gain control over my assets?" Michael finally found his voice. "Mom, we're not scheming anything. We're just trying to prepare for different scenarios and make sure everyone's needs are met." "Everyone's needs," I said with bitter clarity. "Meaning your need to access my money without having to ask for it or account for how you spend it." The pretense of family concern finally cracked, and Rebecca's true feelings emerged with startling viciousness. "You know what, Dorothy? Maybe it's time for some honesty," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "We have been thinking about everyone's needs, including yours. And your needs include having family who care about you and are willing to manage the responsibilities that you're becoming less capable of handling yourself." "Less capable?" I asked incredulously. "Yes, less capable," she continued, her voice rising. "You're 70 years old, you live alone in a huge penthouse, you're isolated from appropriate social activities, and you're making financial decisions based on outdated ideas about money management and family obligations." Michael tried to interject. "Rebecca, maybe we should—" "No, Michael," she snapped. "Your mother needs to hear this. Dorothy, we've been patient with your resistance to practical planning, but your stubbornness is creating problems for everyone. Emma and Jacob need stability and security. Michael and I need to plan for our family's future. And you need to accept that your role in this family is changing." "My role is changing?" "Yes. You're becoming dependent on us for companionship, care, and practical support. We're the ones managing your social calendar, helping with your medical appointments, and making sure you're not isolated or vulnerable. But instead of being grateful for our care, you're fighting us about financial arrangements that would benefit everyone." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Rebecca was reframing her exploitation of my resources as care that I should be grateful for, and my resistance to their control as ungrateful stubbornness. "And frankly," she continued, "your attitude about money is becoming problematic. You act like providing opportunities for your grandchildren and supporting your son's career development is some kind of imposition rather than a normal family responsibility." "Family responsibility?" "Yes, family responsibility. When you have wealth and other family members need support, helping them isn't charity, it's obligation. Emma and Jacob didn't choose to have a grandmother with resources and parents with limited income. They shouldn't be penalized because you want to hoard money instead of using it to benefit the people you claim to love." Rebecca had just articulated the entitlement philosophy that had been driving their behavior for the past 2 years. My wealth wasn't my property. It was a family resource that I was selfishly controlling instead of sharing appropriately. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked with dangerous calm. Michael and Rebecca exchanged glances before Rebecca answered with the kind of ultimatum that revealed the full extent of their presumption. "We're proposing that you start acting like a responsible family member instead of a selfish old woman who cares more about controlling money than caring for people." The words hung in the air like a physical slap. "And if I don't?" Rebecca's response was swift and brutal. "Then maybe you should consider whether this family arrangement is working for anyone. Maybe you'd be happier living somewhere else where you can control your money and your decisions without having to consider how they affect other people." She was threatening to cut off my access to my grandchildren if I didn't submit to their financial control. "Are you telling me to leave?" "I'm telling you to decide whether you want to be part of this family or apart from this family," Rebecca said with cold finality. Because right now, your attitude is making it very difficult for everyone else. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. You're absolutely right, Rebecca, I said with a calm that surprised even me. This arrangement isn't working for everyone, and I am going to decide whether I want to be part of this family dynamic or apart from it. I walked to the front door and put on my coat. Where are you going? Michael asked, suddenly alarmed. I'm going outside to think about your ultimatum, I replied. I need some fresh air to consider my decision. Dorothy, it's 15 below zero, Rebecca protested. You can't go outside in this weather. Actually, I can. It's my decision to make. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, feeling the brutal cold hit my face like a physical blow. Dorothy, come back inside, Michael called. We can discuss this reasonably. No, I called back. Rebecca just told me to decide whether I want to be part of this family or apart from it. I'm going to think about that decision. I stood on the porch in my coat, looking out at the snow-covered street and the frozen landscape, feeling the cold seep through my clothing and into my bones. Behind me, I could hear Michael and Rebecca arguing in hushed voices about what to do. After 10 minutes, I was genuinely cold and ready to go back inside to continue the conversation. I tried the front door handle. It was locked. I knocked on the door. Michael, the door is locked. No response. I knocked harder. Michael, Rebecca, the door is locked. I could see them through the front window, standing in the hallway, looking at me but not moving toward the door. I knocked again, now genuinely alarmed by the cold and confused by their behavior. Let me in. It's freezing out here. Rebecca appeared at the front door window and spoke through the glass. Maybe this will teach you not to interfere with our family decisions, she said with a cruelty that took my breath away. Then she walked away from the door, leaving me standing outside in sub-zero temperatures in my nightgown and coat. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the realization that my son and daughter-in-law had just locked me outside their house in life-threatening weather conditions because I had refused to submit to their financial ultimatum. They were willing to risk my physical safety to make a point about their control over my life and resources. That's when everything became crystal clear about who they really were and what our relationship had really become. Standing on that frozen porch, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity about my situation that cut through 2 years of gradual manipulation and systematic exploitation. Michael and Rebecca had just demonstrated that they were willing to risk my life to maintain their control over my money. They had escalated from financial manipulation to physical intimidation, locking me outside in life-threatening weather because I had refused to accept their ultimatum about family financial arrangements. But more importantly, they had revealed their fundamental assumption that I was powerless to resist their control because I was financially and emotionally dependent on their relationship. They thought that my love for my grandchildren and my desire to maintain family connections meant I would eventually submit to any treatment they chose to impose, rather than risk losing access to Emma and Jacob. They thought that my age and social isolation meant I had no alternatives to accepting their management of my life and resources. Most critically, they thought that my wealth was effectively their wealth, and that my resistance to their control was temporary stubbornness that could be overcome through escalating pressure and intimidation. Standing in that brutal cold, I realized that everything I had interpreted as family closeness and mutual support had actually been a systematic campaign to gain control over my life and assets. The family financial optimization meetings weren't collaborative planning. They were attempts to formalize their access to my money. The health concerns and safety worries weren't expressions of care. They were justifications for restricting my independence and autonomy. The isolation from my friends and advisors wasn't protection from stress. It was elimination of outside perspectives that might help me recognize their manipulation. The twins' entitled behavior wasn't normal teenage development. It was the result of being taught that my resources were family property rather than generous gifts, And the ultimatum Rebecca had just delivered wasn't family problem-solving, it was financial extortion designed to force my submission to their control. But they had made one critical miscalculation in their assessment of my vulnerability and dependence. They had assumed that my love for my family meant I was emotionally dependent on their approval and access. They had assumed that my age meant I was becoming incapable of independent decision-making and action. Most importantly, they had assumed that my wealth was primarily symbolic rather than practical, and that I wouldn't actually use my financial power to protect myself from their exploitation. Standing on that porch, I decided to provide them with a comprehensive education about exactly how wrong they were on all three assumptions. I walked to my car, which was parked in their driveway, and drove back to my penthouse through the blizzard, taking the most dangerous drive of my life to escape people who had proven they were willing to risk my life for their financial advantage. I spent the rest of that night in my penthouse, warm and safe, making a series of phone calls that would demonstrate to Michael and Rebecca exactly how much power they had underestimated and exactly how expensive their mistreatment of me was about to become. The first call was to my longtime friend and neighbor, Margaret Anderson, who I woke up at 3 a.m. to ask for immediate help. "Dorothy, are you all right? It's 3 in the morning. Margaret, I need you to witness something for me, and I need you to do it tonight. Can you come to my apartment?" "Of course. What's wrong?" "My son and daughter-in-law just locked me outside their house in sub-zero weather because I refused to give them financial control over my assets. I need a witness to document my condition and state of mind before I take action to protect myself." Margaret arrived within 30 minutes, along with her daughter Linda, who was a nurse practitioner and could provide medical documentation of my condition. "Dorothy, you could have died out there," Linda said as she examined the frostbite on my fingers and documented my core body temperature. "Exposure to those temperatures for extended periods can cause serious injury or death." "I know," I replied, "and I need you both to document exactly what happened and my current physical and mental condition." Margaret and Linda spent 2 hours with me, taking photographs of my frostbite injuries, recording detailed statements about the evening's events, and documenting my mental clarity and decision-making capacity. "Dorothy, what are you planning to do?" Margaret asked. "I'm planning to show Michael and Rebecca what happens when you threaten someone who has actual power instead of the powerless elderly woman they think I am." The second call was to my attorney, James Harrison, who I also woke up in the middle of the night. "James, I need immediate legal action to protect myself from financial elder abuse, and I need it implemented before business hours tomorrow." "Dorothy, what's happened?" I explained the evening's events, the systematic financial exploitation, and the escalating control and manipulation I had been experiencing. "James, they locked me outside in life-threatening weather because I refused to give them control over my financial accounts. This has escalated from exploitation to physical endangerment." "Dorothy, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse, financial exploitation, and potentially assault. We need to document everything and consider filing criminal charges. I want to file civil charges and obtain restraining orders, but first I want to cut off their access to my financial support. I want every credit card, bank account, and automatic payment that they have access to frozen immediately. I can arrange for emergency court orders, but Dorothy, you need to understand that this will create immediate hardship for their family, including your grandchildren." "James, they just demonstrated that they're willing to risk my life to maintain control over my money. Their children's comfort is no longer my primary concern." The third call was to my financial advisor, Robert Chen, who I also contacted in the middle of the night. "Robert, I need emergency action on all accounts that have secondary access authorizations for my son and daughter-in-law. I want every card, account, and automatic payment frozen immediately." "Dorothy, what's happened?" I explained the situation and my immediate need to cut off their access to my financial resources. "Robert, they have credit cards linked to my accounts. They have access to checking accounts for family expenses, and they have automatic payments set up for various services. I want all of it stopped immediately." "Dorothy, I can implement emergency freezes, but this will affect their mortgage payments, utility bills, credit card payments, and any other services that are being paid through your accounts. That's exactly what I want. They just locked me outside in a blizzard because I wouldn't give them more control over my money. They're about to learn what happens when they lose the control they already have. By 6 a.m., I had arranged for comprehensive legal protection and complete financial cutoff of Michael and Rebecca's access to my resources. Emergency restraining orders would be served that morning, prohibiting them from contacting me or attempting to access my financial accounts. All credit cards linked to my accounts would be canceled immediately. All automatic payments for their household expenses would be stopped. All access to checking accounts and investment accounts would be revoked. And most importantly, all legal authorizations that gave them any role in my financial or medical affairs would be terminated. At 9 a.m., while Michael and Rebecca were presumably getting the twins ready for school and preparing for their normal day, my attorney was serving them with restraining orders, and my financial advisor was canceling every form of access they had to my money. I can only imagine their confusion when their credit cards were declined at the coffee shop. I can only picture their panic when they tried to access the checking account for household expenses and discovered it had been frozen. I can only envision their desperation when they realized that every financial safety net I had provided for the past 2 years had been removed in a single morning. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from Michael and Rebecca that I declined to answer. By 11 a.m., they were calling from different phone numbers, presumably trying to reach me from the twins' phones or neighbors' phones. By noon, they were leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that documented their growing understanding of their financial situation. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with the credit cards," Michael's first message said. "They're saying the accounts have been canceled, but that can't be right. Can you call the bank and straighten this out?" "Dorothy, we're having problems with the checking account," Rebecca's message said 20 minutes later. "The bank says access has been revoked, but we have bills that need to be paid today. Can you call us back immediately?" "Mom, what's going on?" Michael's voice was rising with panic in his third message. "We can't access any of the accounts. The credit cards aren't working, and we have automatic payments that are going to bounce if this isn't fixed today." "Dorothy, this is ridiculous." Rebecca's message was angry rather than concerned. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're hurting Emma and Jacob more than you're hurting us. Their school payments, their activity fees, everything is connected to those accounts." By 2 p.m., the messages had become desperate and revealed exactly how completely dependent they had become on my financial support. "Mom, please call us back." Michael's voice was shaking. "The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we don't have access to the account. If this payment is late, it will affect our credit rating and could trigger foreclosure proceedings." "Dorothy, you're being cruel and vindictive." Rebecca's message was filled with barely controlled rage. "We had one argument, and you're punishing our entire family. This is elder abuse in reverse. You're using your money to hurt people who love you." "Mom, the twins are asking questions about why their activities are being canceled and why we can't pay for things we promised them," Michael pleaded. "Whatever problem you have with Rebecca and me, please don't take it out on Emma and Jacob." The final message, which arrived at 4 p.m., revealed the complete collapse of their financial security and their growing understanding that I was not going to reverse my decision. "Dorothy," Rebecca's voice was cold and threatening, "if you don't restore our access to those accounts immediately, we're going to have no choice but to pursue legal action for financial elder abuse. You can't use your money as a weapon against your own family." That evening, I received a visit from the police, who had been contacted by Michael and Rebecca with claims that I was experiencing a mental health crisis and was making irrational decisions about my finances. "Ma'am, we received a report that you might be experiencing confusion or distress that's affecting your judgment about financial matters," the officer explained diplomatically. "Officer, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not experiencing any confusion or distress. I made deliberate decisions to protect myself from financial exploitation and abuse." I showed him the documentation Margaret and Linda had prepared, the legal restraining orders that had been issued, and the medical records showing my frostbite injuries from being locked outside. "Ma'am, are you saying that your family members caused these injuries?" "I'm saying that my son and daughter-in-law locked me outside their house in sub-zero weather last night because I refused to give them control over my financial accounts. These injuries are the result of that treatment." The officer's expression changed dramatically as he realized he was investigating a case of elder abuse rather than responding to a mental health crisis. "Ma'am, would you like to file charges for endangerment and elder abuse? I'm already pursuing civil remedies through my attorney, but yes, I think criminal charges are appropriate given the circumstances." Over the following days, as Michael and Rebecca struggled to manage their financial obligations without access to my support, the full extent of their dependency became clear to everyone involved, including them. They couldn't make their mortgage payment and received a late payment notice within a week. They couldn't pay their utility bills and received disconnection warnings within 10 days. They couldn't fund the twins' private school tuition and received enrollment termination notices within 2 weeks. They couldn't pay for extracurricular activities, and Emma and Jacob were dropped from dance classes, robotics programs, and tutoring services. They couldn't maintain their vehicle payments and received repossession warnings. Most importantly, they couldn't sustain the lifestyle they had been living for the past 2 years and were forced to confront the reality of their actual income versus their chosen expenses. Michael was earning approximately $35,000 annually from his real estate sales career. Rebecca was earning nothing, having left her nursing job to become a full-time household manager and family blogger. Their combined income of $35,000 was completely inadequate to support a mortgage, private school tuition, extracurricular activities, and the middle-class lifestyle they had been maintaining with my subsidies. Without my contributions, they were facing immediate financial crisis that would require dramatic lifestyle changes, potential bankruptcy, and possibly losing their home. The twins, who had been accustomed to private school education, expensive activities, and unlimited access to technology and entertainment, were suddenly experiencing significant financial limitations that they had never encountered before. "Grandma Dorothy, why can't we go to St. Catherine's anymore?" Emma asked during a supervised phone call that was arranged through my attorney. "Mom says we have to go to public school because of money problems." "And why did my robotics program get canceled?" Jacob added. "The teacher says our account is closed and we owe money for equipment." The children were experiencing the natural consequences of their parents' financial irresponsibility for the first time in their lives, and they were confused and upset by the sudden changes in their circumstances. But most revealing were the conversations I had with Michael and Rebecca during the court-mandated mediation sessions that were arranged to address the restraining orders and elder abuse allegations. "Mom, you're destroying our family over one argument," Michael pleaded during our first mediation session. "We said things we didn't mean, but you're punishing everyone for mistakes that we're willing to apologize for." "This isn't about one argument, Michael," I replied calmly. "This is about 2 years of systematic financial exploitation that escalated to the point where you locked me outside in life-threatening weather because I wouldn't submit to your control. But Mom, we need your help," he continued desperately. "We can't maintain our life without your support. The kids can't go to private school. We can't pay our mortgage. We're going to lose everything." "Michael, you should have considered those consequences before you decided to threaten and intimidate me." Rebecca was less apologetic and more focused on practical solutions that would restore their access to my money. "Dorothy, we understand that you're upset, but we need to find a way to move forward that protects everyone's interests," she said, with the kind of calculated reasonableness that I now recognized as manipulation. "The children shouldn't suffer because of adult conflicts. Rebecca, the children are suffering because their parents chose to live beyond their means and depend on financial support that they then used as leverage to control and abuse the person providing it." "That's not what happened," she protested. "We had disagreements about financial planning, but we never abused you. You locked me outside in sub-zero weather because I refused to give you control over my bank accounts. What would you call that?" That was a moment of anger and poor judgment, not systematic abuse. Rebecca, that moment of anger and poor judgment was the culmination of 2 years of systematic financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and social isolation. You didn't suddenly become abusive. You revealed how abusive you had been all along. After 6 weeks of mediation, legal proceedings, and family crisis management, Michael and Rebecca finally acknowledged the extent of their exploitation and expressed willingness to rebuild our relationship on different terms. Dorothy, we want to take responsibility for our behavior and find a way to repair our family relationships, Michael said during what would be our final mediation session. We understand that we took advantage of your generosity and that we crossed boundaries that were unacceptable. And we want to apologize specifically for the night when we locked you out, Rebecca added, though her apology seemed more strategic than sincere. That was dangerous and cruel, and we're grateful that you weren't seriously injured. What are you proposing? I asked. We're proposing that we start over with clear boundaries and mutual respect, Michael explained. We want to rebuild our relationship based on appreciation rather than expectation, and we want to teach Emma and Jacob to understand and respect your generosity rather than taking it for granted. And financially? Rebecca took a deep breath before responding. We understand that your financial support is a gift, not an obligation. We want to develop independence from that support while rebuilding the trust and respect that would make any future assistance feel appropriate rather than coercive. What does that mean, practically? It means I'm going back to nursing full-time, Rebecca said. I've already applied for positions at Minneapolis General and several other hospitals. We can't sustain our current lifestyle on one income, but we can live appropriately on 2 incomes without depending on your subsidies. And I'm expanding my real estate business with a more realistic approach, Michael added. I've been treating it as a hobby rather than a career, but we need steady income that we can depend on. What about the twins' education and activities? They'll attend public school, which is actually excellent in our district, Rebecca replied. And they'll participate in activities that we can afford, rather than activities that require external funding. And what about our relationship going forward? Michael looked directly at me with what seemed like genuine remorse. Mom, we want a relationship based on love and respect rather than financial arrangements. We want to spend time with you because we enjoy your company, not because we need your money. And we want Emma and Jacob to develop a genuine relationship with their grandmother, rather than seeing you as a source of funding. Dorothy, Rebecca added, we know it will take time to rebuild trust, but we're committed to proving that we can have healthy family relationships that don't involve financial exploitation or manipulation. I considered their proposals carefully before responding with the terms that would govern any future relationship. I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but it will be on completely different terms, I said firmly. First, there will be no financial support of any kind until trust is rebuilt and sustained. You need to prove that you can live independently and treat me with respect without depending on my money. We understand, Michael said. Second, any future financial gifts will be my decision, made on my timeline, based on my assessment of your behavior and attitude. There will be no requests, no expectations, and no assumptions about my financial involvement in your lives. That's fair, Rebecca agreed. Third, Emma and Jacob need to learn to interact with me as their grandmother rather than as a source of funding. They need to show genuine interest in my life, respect for my opinions, and appreciation for any gifts or opportunities I choose to provide. We'll work on that, Michael promised. Fourth, you will never again attempt to influence my financial decisions, estate planning, or professional relationships. My money is my business, and my choices about how to use it are not subject to family consultation or approval. Understood, they both said. And finally, if you ever again attempt to manipulate, threaten, or intimidate me in any way, this relationship will end permanently. I will not tolerate another episode like the night you locked me outside. Dorothy, that will never happen again. Rebecca said emphatically. I hope not, because next time there won't be mediation or reconciliation. There will simply be permanent consequences that you won't be able to apologize or negotiate your way out of. 6 months after that frozen February night, our family relationships had been completely restructured around mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Rebecca had returned to full-time nursing and was earning $75,000 annually. Michael had doubled his real estate income by treating it as a serious career rather than a casual pursuit, earning approximately $65,000 annually. Together, their $140,000 household income was sufficient to support their mortgage, living expenses, and a modest but comfortable lifestyle. The twins had adjusted to public school remarkably well and were discovering that they could excel academically and socially without the expensive private education they had previously considered essential. Emma joined the school dance team, which cost $200 per semester instead of $2,000. Jacob participated in the robotics club, which was funded by the school district rather than requiring thousands of dollars in private fees. Most importantly, both children had learned to interact with me as a person rather than as a source of funding. They asked about my business activities, shared stories about their school experiences, and showed genuine interest in my opinions and preferences. Grandma Dorothy, tell me about when you started your company, Emma said during one of our monthly dinners. Mom says you built it from nothing when Grandpa Paul died. And Grandma, can you teach me about investing? Jacob asked. I want to understand how money works so I can be financially independent like you. These conversations were more meaningful and rewarding than any of the expensive activities I had previously funded because they were based on genuine curiosity and respect rather than entitlement and expectation. Michael and Rebecca had also learned to appreciate our relationship rather than taking it for granted. They invited me to family activities because they wanted my company, not because they needed my financial support. They asked for my advice because they valued my experience, not because they were trying to manipulate me into providing funding. Mom, would you like to come to Emma's dance recital next week? Michael asked during one of our phone calls. She's been working really hard, and she'd love to have you there. Dorothy, we're planning a family camping trip this summer, Rebecca mentioned. Nothing expensive, just a long weekend at a state park. Would you like to join us? These invitations felt genuine because they weren't connected to financial requests or expectations. They were simply family members wanting to spend time together. 1 year after the night that changed everything, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from our family crisis and recovery. The most important lesson was about the difference between generosity and enabling. For 2 years, I had believed that my financial support was helping Michael and Rebecca build stability and success. What it was actually doing was preventing them from developing the skills, discipline, and independence they needed to support themselves and their family. By removing my financial safety net, I had forced them to confront their actual capabilities and resources, which turned out to be much greater than any of us had realized. Rebecca was an excellent nurse who could earn substantial income when she chose to work. Michael was capable of real estate success when he treated it as a career rather than a hobby. The financial crisis I had created by withdrawing my support had actually benefited them by forcing them to develop genuine independence and self-reliance. The second lesson was about respect and boundaries in family relationships. Love doesn't require accepting mistreatment, and generosity doesn't require accepting exploitation. Family members who truly care about you will respect your boundaries and appreciate your contributions. Family members who see you primarily as a resource to be managed will always push for more control and access. By establishing and enforcing clear boundaries, I had created the foundation for healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The third lesson was about the importance of maintaining independence and outside perspectives. Michael and Rebecca's manipulation had been most effective when I was isolated from friends and advisors who might have helped me recognize their exploitation. By rebuilding my social connections and professional relationships, I had created a network of support that would help me identify future attempts at manipulation or control. But perhaps the most important lesson was about personal power and self-respect. At 70 years old, I had proven to myself and my family that I was still capable of protecting my interests, making independent decisions, and demanding appropriate treatment from people who claimed to love me. The night they locked me outside in the cold, Michael and Rebecca thought they were demonstrating their power over me. What they actually demonstrated was that I had far more power than they had ever imagined, and that I was willing to use that power to protect my dignity and independence. The most satisfying aspect of the entire experience was watching Michael and Rebecca receive a comprehensive education in financial reality and the actual cost of the lifestyle they had been taking for granted. During the 6 weeks when they had no access to my financial support, they were forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about their spending, habits, and life choices. Their monthly expenses, which had seemed reasonable when I was covering most of them, turned out to be completely unsustainable on their actual income. The mortgage payment alone consumed 40% of Michael's real estate earnings. Add in utilities, insurance, vehicle payments, and basic living expenses, and they were spending more than 100% of their income before considering any discretionary expenses. The twins' private school tuition, which they had presented as an educational necessity, represented more than half of Michael's annual income. Their extracurricular activities cost more per month than many families spend on groceries. Their vacation expenses from the previous year exceeded what most people earn in several months. Dorothy, I had no idea how much money we were actually spending, Rebecca admitted during one of our mediation sessions. When someone else is paying the bills, you lose track of what things actually cost. And I didn't realize how little I was actually earning from real estate, Michael added. When all the major expenses were covered, my commission checks seemed like plenty of money. But when we had to pay for everything ourselves, I realized I wasn't earning nearly enough to support our lifestyle. They were learning lessons about budgeting, priorities, and financial reality that they should have learned years earlier, but had been protected from by my subsidies. Rebecca's return to nursing provided another educational experience. After 4 years away from professional work, she had to rebuild her skills, update her certifications, and prove herself in a demanding hospital environment. I forgot how much I actually enjoyed nursing, she told me months later. And I forgot how good it feels to earn money through your own work rather than depending on someone else's generosity. The financial independence is amazing, she continued. When I buy something with money I earned, it feels completely different than when I was spending money that came from you. Michael's renewed focus on real estate sales also produced surprising results. When he treated it as a career rather than a hobby, when he worked consistent hours and followed up on leads systematically, his income doubled within 6 months. Mom, I think I was afraid of success, he confessed during one of our conversations. As long as I could depend on your support, I didn't have to risk really trying and potentially failing. But when that safety net was gone, I had to either succeed or face serious consequences. And it turns out I'm actually pretty good at real estate when I work at it consistently, he added with pride that I hadn't heard in his voice for years. Perhaps the most dramatic change occurred in Emma and Jacob's attitudes and behavior once. They could no longer take my financial support for granted. The transition to public school, which they had initially resented, turned out to be beneficial in ways none of us had anticipated. The diversity of students and families exposed them to different perspectives on money, success, and family priorities. Grandma, most of my friends' families live on one income, Emma observed during one of our visits. And they seemed just as happy as we were when we had all that expensive stuff. And some of the smartest kids in my class have never had private tutoring or expensive equipment, Jacob added. I thought you needed to spend a lot of money to be successful, but that's not really true. Both children began to understand the difference between wants and needs, and to appreciate opportunities and experiences rather than taking them for granted. When I occasionally chose to provide special gifts or experiences, birthday presents, tickets to events, or educational opportunities, their gratitude was genuine and their excitement was infectious. "Grandma Dorothy, thank you so much for the art supplies," Emma said after I gave her a set of professional drawing materials for her birthday. "I'm going to create a special project just for you with them." "And Grandma, the programming camp you paid for was amazing," Jacob reported after a summer technology program I had funded. "I learned so much, and I want to show you the app I created." These expressions of appreciation were meaningful because they came from children who understood the value of what they were receiving rather than from children who expected constant gifts and experiences. Both twins also began to show interest in earning money themselves through chores, odd jobs, and age-appropriate work opportunities. "Grandma, I'm babysitting for the neighbors to earn money for new dance shoes," Emma told me proudly. "Mom and Dad said if I want the expensive ones, I need to contribute to the cost. And I'm doing yard work for people in our neighborhood," Jacob added. "I want to save money for a better computer, but I want to buy it myself instead of just expecting someone else to pay for it." They were learning lessons about work, earning, and financial responsibility that would serve them well throughout their lives. One unexpected aspect of our family crisis was the reaction from friends, neighbors, and community members who had observed our family dynamics over the years. Several of my longtime friends expressed relief that I had finally addressed what they had privately considered an exploitative situation. "Dorothy, we've been worried about you for months," my bridge partner Margaret told me. "You seemed to be losing yourself in that family's demands and expectations. We could see that you were becoming isolated and controlled, but we didn't know how to help. We thought about talking to you directly," added another friend, "but family situations are so sensitive, and we weren't sure if our concerns would be welcome." I realized that my isolation had been more obvious to outside observers than it had been to me, and that people who cared about me had been witnessing my gradual loss of independence with concern and frustration. The twins' teachers and activity directors also provided interesting perspectives on the changes in our family situation. "Emma has become much more focused and motivated since she started at public school," her dance teacher observed. "When everything is provided for you, it's easy to take opportunities for granted. But when she had to earn her place on the team and contribute to costume costs, her commitment level increased dramatically." Jacob is showing more creativity and problem-solving skills in our robotics program, his teacher noted. Instead of expecting expensive equipment to solve problems, he's learning to innovate with available resources. It's actually made him a better engineer. The financial constraints that I had imposed on their family had forced the twins to develop resourcefulness, appreciation, and work ethic that unlimited resources had actually prevented them from learning. The legal aspects of our family crisis were resolved through civil mediation rather than criminal prosecution, but the process provided important documentation and protections that would prevent future exploitation. The restraining orders that had been issued immediately after the incident were modified to allow supervised family contact, but maintained financial protections that prevented Michael and Rebecca from accessing my accounts or making claims on my assets. The elder abuse investigation resulted in official documentation of their exploitation tactics, which would provide legal protection if similar situations arose in the future. Most importantly, I updated all of my legal documents, wills, trusts, powers of attorney, and estate planning instruments to reflect my new understanding of family dynamics and to prevent anyone from gaining control over my assets through manipulation or intimidation. "Dorothy, the legal protections we've put in place will prevent anyone from exploiting your generosity in the future," my attorney explained. "But more importantly, they create clear consequences for anyone who attempts to manipulate or control you. These documents make it clear that your financial support for family members is voluntary and can be terminated at any time for any reason. No one can claim legal entitlement to your resources or use family relationships to justify exploitation. The boy experience taught me several important lessons about wealth, family, and financial planning that I now share with other older adults who may be facing similar challenges. First, generosity should never compromise your own security or independence. When your financial support begins to control your life rather than enhance it, it's time to reconsider the arrangement. Second, financial gifts should be truly voluntary, given without expectation of gratitude or behavior modification, and withdrawn when they become sources of manipulation or control. Third, enabling adult children to avoid financial responsibility doesn't help them develop the skills and character they need for long-term success. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow people to experience the natural consequences of their choices. Fourth, maintaining financial independence is crucial for maintaining personal autonomy. When other people control your money, they control your options and your power to protect yourself. Finally, it's never too late to establish boundaries, demand respect, and prioritize your own well-being over other people's comfort or convenience. Today, 2 years after that frozen February night, our family relationships continue to evolve and improve based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Michael and Rebecca have maintained their financial independence and have actually thanked me for forcing them to develop self-reliance and realistic perspectives about money management. Mom, cutting off our access to your money was the best thing that ever happened to our marriage and our family, Michael told me recently. We're closer now because we're working together toward shared goals rather than depending on external support. And we're teaching Emma and Jacob lessons about work and money that we never could have taught them when everything was provided for us, Rebecca added. They're more confident and capable because they're learning to solve problems and achieve goals through their own efforts. The twins have grown into thoughtful teenagers who understand the value of money, the importance of education, and the satisfaction of earning what they receive. Emma is now 15 and works part-time at a local dance studio, teaching younger children and saving money for college. Jacob is 14 and has started a small computer repair business, earning money while developing technical skills that may lead to future career opportunities. Both children treat me with genuine respect and affection, and our relationships are based on shared interests and mutual caring rather than financial transactions. I continue to provide occasional gifts and opportunities, college savings contributions, special birthday presents, educational experiences, but these are surprises rather than expectations, and they're received with genuine appreciation rather than entitled assumptions. Most importantly, I've maintained my independence, my social connections, and my control over my own life and resources. At 72, I'm more active, engaged, and satisfied with my relationships than I was during the period when I was being systematically exploited by people who claimed to love me. If you're watching this story and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, I want you to know that you have more power than you might realize. Love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Generosity doesn't require you to enable irresponsibility. Being a good parent or grandparent doesn't require you to sacrifice your own well-being for other people's comfort. You have the right to set boundaries about how your resources are used and how you're treated by people who benefit from your generosity. You have the right to demand respect, appreciation, and consideration from family members regardless of how much financial support you provide. You have the right to change or end financial arrangements that become sources of manipulation, control, or exploitation. And you have the right to prioritize your own security, independence, and dignity over other people's expectations or demands. If family members threaten to withdraw their love or access to grandchildren because you won't submit to their financial control, they're revealing that their relationship with you is transactional rather than genuine. If people claim to love you but only treat you well when you're providing money or services, they don't love you, They love what you can do for them. And if anyone ever locks you out in the cold, literally or metaphorically, because you won't give them what they want, they've shown you exactly who they are and how little your well-being means to them. Trust me when I tell you that the temporary discomfort of establishing boundaries is worth the E. Long-term benefits of relationships based on genuine respect and appreciation. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are taking advantage of you is to stop enabling their exploitation and force them to develop the character and capabilities they need for genuine success and happiness. The frozen bank accounts I created that February morning weren't punishment. They were education. And the education was worth every uncomfortable moment of the process that followed. Sometimes you have to freeze people out of your resources to warm up their appreciation for your presence in their lives. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever been taken advantage of by family members who expected unlimited access to your resources? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if this story has inspired you to examine your own family financial arrangements. And if you found this story of reclaiming power and demanding respect resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who chose themselves when others wouldn't choose them. Sometimes the coldest night can lead to the warmest family relationships, but only if you're willing to let people feel the consequences of their actions instead of protecting them from the results of their choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.